beta-glucans. Second one's going to be the turkey tail study because I want to share that with you. The first study was 10 years ago and everybody got all excited about turkey tail. Second study 10 years later has some results that need to be looked at in a more granular fashion. And then we'll talk about maitake and canine lymphoma, and then lion's mane and the microbiome. So where are we? Okay, there we go. All righty. So yeah, that's our agenda. As I just said. So okay. So the first study was was out of Eastern Europe, out of Hungary, and they used puppies that were in a shelter that were presumed immune compromised. They did some studies to verify that they were in fact immune compromised, and they vaccinated them just straight with the straight protocol for distemper, parvo, and rabies at the different ages, and they were unable to get protective titers for the rabies vaccinations for these puppies, and they also had some delayed titers with the parvovirus. So what they did was they then preconditioned the same group of puppies with beta-glucans, and then they repeated the vaccination. So what happens when you're doing vaccine titers and it comes up not protective? You just vaccinate again. I mean, it's kind of like, if you don't understand somebody, they're in a foreign language, they're yelling that same foreign language louder is not going to help you understand it any better. So there's something that we should do. We should precondition their immune system so they're better able to process the vaccine and maintain a long-standing protection. So that's what mushrooms can do. And they used the oyster mushroom in Eastern Europe. They have an extract of the oyster mushroom beta-glucan called Pluran. It's a commercial product, and so this probably was funded by that company, or at least partially funded in terms of donating product. And so I think this is a really great study to know. It gives us something to do. You don't have to it's not just oyster mushroom, it's really any mushroom beta-glucan will do the same thing as long as you're dosing it properly. In this case, I would dose it at the moderate level of maybe 5 to 10 mg per kg of beta-glucans, because I don't think you need to go to the cancer level with that. Then to talk a little bit about oyster mushroom. Oyster mushroom's one of the most prized edible mushrooms. There's many different variations of oyster mushroom. They've got yellow ones, and they've got blue ones, blue oyster cult, you probably heard of that. And they grow on trees, and common everywhere. I've got, although we don't have very many mushrooms growing on Front Range, Colorado, I do have, we had a lot of rain this summer. I've got a cottonwood tree out in front of my house that grew some oyster mushrooms. I cut them up. They're really fibrous, but so I dried them, and I'm going to use them as soup stock because that's probably where they're best used anyway, at that dry and fibrous nature. But they're basidiomycetes. They're gilled, prized, edible. But in terms of its uses, we think of it for immunomodulation, as we saw with the vaccine titers. It's anti-inflammatory, anti-neoplastic, vaccination support in terms of its immune modulation, but also things like chronic pancreatitis. And there's some good evidence that chronic pancreatitis is controlled with the use of antioxidants. That oftentimes it's that oxidative stress in the pancreatic tissue that kind of precipitates or spikes these episodes of inflammation. So mushrooms can be a good partner there. Oyster mushrooms, probably shiitake as well, and maitake are all really good for digestion. Hyperlipidemia, in part because of its effect on cholesterol, also reduces other fats, has anti-aging, antioxidant, as I mentioned, source of lovastatin. And how does it do that? It contains ergosterol and beta-glucans and lovastatin and ergothioneine, carotenoids, copper, and zinc levels are higher than other mushrooms, so be aware of that if you have a copper hepatopathy patient you're working with. And it has some glutathione in it as well. It's 35% protein. These are very good quality food, for food. Now, I did speak earlier this summer to IVIS, and so I put together energetics, TCM energetics for these. I thought that since so many vets here at AHVMA also are involved in TCM, I would share these with you as well. So Pleurotus, oyster mushroom species, they're sweet, a little bit bitter, strengthens the spleen, digestion, tonifies the kidneys and adrenals, stress, supports zung qi organs in terms of organ homeostasis, and tonifies deficiency. We see it active in the liver, stomach, spleen, and kidney. This was a cool study, just came out, in which they were looking at using beta-glucans as trained immunity adjuvants. We now know what trained immunity means, for rabies vaccinations. Again, looking at ways, because the rabies vaccination is so important to protect our animals from rabies, but it's such a strong disease that the vaccine itself also can have problems as far as with Guillain-Barré syndrome and things like that. So trying to find more effective ways to vaccinate less but more effectively, I think, was the reason behind this. Now what's interesting, the beta-glucans in this study were derived from a protozoa, from Euglena. So kind of cool. And but they used a single dose injectable. So instead of interfacing with all the dendritic cells in the gut, which is normally how beta-glucans are ingested and how they work, we see that it somehow interfaces with the dendritic tissues in the subcutaneous tissue as well. And what they found was the beta-glucan worked well for immune training of the canine macrophages and enhancing rabies vaccination protection. The trained innate immunity parameters were assessed for the first 30 days of the trial prior to rabies, and the second phase of the trial assessed enhancement of the adaptive immune response to a killed rabies vax. And what they found was that B cell and T cell specific responses were monitored and found both an increased B cell immune response as well as a T cell response that we saw with increased levels of cytokines. So this is a second study that supports the findings of the first study that beta-glucans can be very valuable for in terms of our vaccination process. And as I mentioned, trained immunity results from the effects of compounds like beta-glucans to act through epigenetic programming and metabolic changes of innate immune cells. In this study, they used macrophages. Now, this is interesting. You know, if you're using something like Apoquel, for instance, you know, which has become very popular and definitely a better choice than prednisone, although apparently has its own issues. This is a study in which they used beta-glucans, yeast-derived beta-glucans, and they used them for a monoclonal antibody that was directed towards cancer. And what they found was when they added the beta-glucans to activate this monoclonal antibody, or activate the immune system in the face of the monoclonal antibody therapies, they found that they could get an increase of 70% kill rate on the cancer cells with the addition of beta-glucans. So we don't really, I think we're starting to use some monoclonal antibodies for cancer in veterinary, but I think we're still not quite there yet. But we are using it for derm, you know, and I'm not in practice, I'm not using Apoquel, but I'm just throwing this out to you. Let's check it out and see if it improves, because what I hear is that it can work really well, and then it kind of stops working. And maybe this would give it better duration of effect. I don't know, but just making some suggestions. When I go through this stuff, things always come into my mind. What could this be used for clinically? So I think that's interesting information. Now this, I've talked about the bone marrow, and this is just a chart that shows we had glucan-induced recovery of bone marrow after irradiation of bone marrow. And so we have the control, and you know, here you see the number of cells, and here you see the number of days after irradiation. So the control, you know, as you can see, is very low. And then with each additional day after radiation, you can see you get increased improvement of your repair of the bone marrow following the radiation. So again, think about that with your chemotherapy patients or your radiation patients when they wind up having, you know, anemia or granulocytopenia. Think about that. Now this is interesting. Vetvica is one of the global experts on beta-glucans. I had the pleasure to work with him a little bit back when I was with RX Vitamins, when I was doing their beta-glucan product. And they did this one combined study in which they did orally administered yeast beta-glucan prophylactically protects against anthrax infection and cancer in mice. Now, these aren't mice that have both anthrax and cancer. These are actually two separate studies that he published under the same journal article. And basically, you know, they had they measured they inoculated them with colon cancer cells, and they measured tumor size as it grew, and they were able to see that group 2 had a 21% decrease in the size of tumors and good quality of life as compared to the control group that were crouching, inactive with reduced body temperature. So that shows some benefit for these for treating the cancer, but also the quality of life. As I mentioned, beta-glucans do help to improve that. And then the anthrax was given to laboratory animals, and they had a 100% survival benefit to the group that received the beta-glucan material. And they dosed this at 0, 2, and 20 mg per kg per day of the beta-glucans. And 10 mice per group. Control group had 50% mortality. So even at 2 mg per kg, they had good survival for any of these mice. Here's a study using the canine brief pain inventory survey, which is the same thing that was used with most of the osteoarthritis cannabis studies. And they used a client questionnaire, and they did see for privately owned dogs, they were given a dry food that had the beta-glucans added to it. This was a yeast-based beta-glucan in Belgium from a pet food company that was wanting to sell pet food with beta-glucans and wanted to have some research to support its value. And they were able to get an improvement. Okay, where's the rest of it? And I'm not here. But basically what they found was they 53 dogs in the study, 7 didn't complete it. They were instructed to continue with whatever analgesic medications study dogs had been using prior, and they found that treatment versus placebo showed greater numerical improvement with activity, stiffness, lameness, and pain, but they weren't able to get statistically significant results. So it trends in that direction. It's suggestive of it. I get asked a lot about mushrooms for arthritis, because obviously arthritis is a big deal out there, and everything that we have these days isn't all that effective. It is effective, but not as effective as we'd like it to be. I think mushrooms can be a good companion with a multimodal program for arthritis because of their antioxidant properties and because of their anti-inflammatory properties. I know I've seen some studies, like one with cordyceps, that it has some analgesic properties in mice that are experimentally made painful and then reduced. The studies we hate to see. But so nonetheless, I think mushrooms can be a good partner. I tell people it's not a standalone for arthritis. You know, you're going to be, the animal's going to be painful, but it's definitely a good partner. And the authors postulate that the beta-glucan improves osteoarthritis due to a reduction in the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which makes sense, and the production of matrix metalloprotease, which has an effect on collagen. Beta-glucans and canine atopy. So two big areas when it comes to problems we see in pets. And in this case, they did a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial using privately owned dogs and a client questionnaire. And again, pet food with or without yeast-based beta-glucan content. They made sure that they were treated for flea allergy, dermatitis, to make sure that wasn't a problem. Only 16 dogs in the placebo group, 50 in the treatment group. The clinical signs were scored for itching, redness, scaling, thickening, and stripping of skin. And they found that the group mean improvement was expressed as a change of severity score over time was greater for all clinical signs. So they did see an improvement, but they kind of had to manipulate the data. So again, I think mushrooms can be good partners for atopic disease, but I don't think they could be standalone. Now we're seeing that cannabis itself is having some benefits. There's 2 studies that have recently been published for atopic dermatitis, and you know, there's some other tools we can use along with mushrooms and cannabis. We can use palmitoyl ethanolamide, the PEA, certainly, you know, allergy, hypersensitization, those sorts of things, and Chinese herbs and NAET for allergies in combination with mushrooms. Some mushrooms, like tremella, has a hydrating effect, and so that's pretty good for the skin in that regards as well. So immune-mediated disease, get a lot of questions about that because mushrooms are immune-mediated, and there's really very little, I mean, we're all worried that we don't want to increase immune system activity when you've got autoimmune disease, but there's really very little evidence to support that. Reishi mushroom seems to be clinically, I hear from practitioners, they feel most comfortable using the reishi mushroom in cases of autoimmune disease. In this case, this study in rheumatology, they used the oyster mushroom, and they looked at the effects of beta-glucan from oyster mushroom on methotrexate treatment in rats that have adjuvant arthritis. Now, adjuvant arthritis doesn't mean naturally occurring arthritis. They inject something that's a sclerosing agent into the joint to create experimentally induced osteoarthritis, which, they think it's a good model for the disease. I question that, but it's the best we've got right now. And then, upper respiratory. You've got children, are getting to be the winter season now. I think beta-glucans from any source, yeast-based, as these studies are, or mushroom-based, can be protective of helping to protect you against upper respiratory disease. Certainly COVID, I think with COVID, that's one reason why we've seen such a growing interest in mushrooms, is everyone was looking for ways to improve to reduce vaccination side effects or improve vaccination effects, protective effects, or to try to avoid a vaccination if you're against that, to still protect you against the COVID. So this was with chronic upper respiratory in children. They were using dosages of about 100 milligrams per day of a beta-glucan, not much. And this was another one in two other studies in which they used about 250 milligrams of beta-glucans in healthy women as compared to the smaller beta-glucan content in children. So think about beta-glucans for that purpose. Okay, turkey tail mushroom, known as yunzhi. The correct name for it is Trametes versicolor. Asia, they still like to call it Coriolis versicolor. I'm not quite sure what that's about. Some historical factoids. Yunzhi means cloud mushroom. Ancient Taoists prized this mushroom for its growth on evergreen trees. They believed that because due to that, the fungus collected yang energy from the roots of the tree, and so they prescribed it for patients with yang deficiency. This was the study that got everybody's interest in 2012, and it was done. This Chinese company has a patent on the PSP extract from the turkey tail mycelium grown in liquid culture. And there's a Japanese company that has a similar patent on a similar extract from the mycelium grown in liquid culture in Japan from a different strain called PSK. Both PSP and PSK are used widely in both China and Japan currently in oncology with human patients and used concurrently with chemotherapy with success. This company is trying to get FDA approval for this mushroom extract in human patients. That's where the money is. So you start with the dog studies. We've got plenty of laboratory animal studies. So that's what this was about. And this really was a phase 1 study. They just wanted to find out what dosages are most effective. And so they only had 5 animals in each of 3 study groups. And so one got 25 mg per kg per day of this PSP product. One got 50 milligrams per day of this PSP product, this mycelial product, and one got 100 milligrams per day of this mycelial product. And then they measured survival time. And what got everybody's attention was the 5 dogs that got the 100 mg per kg per day dosage lived longer than the historical length of life that dogs that were that they used as a control for dogs that historically were given chemotherapy and splenectomized for hemangiosarcoma. So everybody got all excited in our integrative community about the value of mushrooms for cancer. The oncologist said, oh, whoa, 5 dogs per study group does not a study make. Let's get a larger study. I was one of the people that was excited, like, oh, those oncologists are so negative, But it took them 10 years, and they were able to recruit 100 dogs, good-sized study, 50. Excuse me. They were able to get 100 dogs. 50 dogs, they used just PSP alone. Now, these were dogs that were splenectomized. They also staged them. They got a lot more data from them than that first study. They did hematocrits. They staged how far the disease had progressed. So they were able to really get a very fine-tuned approach to what's working and what's not working with what kinds of patients and so on. So half of them got the PSP alone, okay? 50 of them. That's good numbers, 25 got the chemotherapy with the PSP combined. And then 25 got chemotherapy with a PSP placebo. So the results were very interesting. And I think that they can help guide you when you have those clients coming in with hemangiosarcoma and they want to know, doc, is it worth treating? You know, I mean, my dog's going to live 2 more months or whatever. I mean, the statistics can be pretty grim. You know, and whether a pet parent wants to spend that kind of money, wants to put their dog through that kind of stuff, wants to live with them a little longer just so they can put them down, it's a difficult decision. There's no right answer. So having more information to know how to make those decisions is important, and this study gives us good information. So let me kind of show you what we learned from this study. Well, first of all, they found that female dogs who just received the PSP alone had hugely negative outcomes. When we went back to that study 10 years ago and we looked at that one successful group, they were almost all male. You know, the males did so much better. And I think it's time that we really started separating sexes when we do these studies, because we know, I mean, there's different responses. Because, you know, female and male are different sexes, and there's a lot of biochemical differences between them. So, so if you look at the females down here with stage one, they only had 108-day survival as compared to more than twice that with the males that had 240 days. Now they also found, and this is important, this is really easy for you to do when they come in, hematocrits. Hematocrit greater than 30 had much better outcomes. Less than 30 sucked. So you can quote me on that. So, so here you look, these are all greater than a 30 hematocrit. The males on PSP alone would live 240 days. With the doxorubicin and the placebo, a little bit more, 373 days. And with the doxorubicin and PSP, 407 days. So that's, you know, that's not a bad period of time to live with your dog following splenectomy. You'll have to wait till the end, I'm sorry. But we'll get to that. So you can see that would be the best case scenario, males with a greater hematocrit than 30. If we look at the hematocrit less than 30 for stage 1, we go from 240 to a little less than 80 days. So hematocrit plays a really big role in prognosis, because it kind of tells you how bad it is. And then if you look at the difference between stage 1 to stage 3, even with the 30, you know, 99 days as compared to 240 days with females goes down from 100 to 62. But here, less than 30 with stage 3, 35 days survival. So if you can get that information, I think this study is large enough and robust enough that it can help guide you in how you guide your clients to make the right decision for them and their family and the dog. Now that's basically it. I'll take your question now.
My question was in regards to whether they were sexually intact in the study.
I think they were all neutered, but I would have to go back and dig down on the details. Pretty sure they were all neutered, and you know, they were all client-owned dogs, so it wouldn't be, you know, experimental animals. I can go, I mean, I can give you I can send you a copy of the study. We can look at it together. But I don't really remember that either way. But good question, thank you. The question, to repeat it, was, did we know whether were they intact dogs or were they neutered? And so I don't know for certain, but I think they were neutered. So when we think about, isn't that beautiful? It's such a beautiful mushroom in the wild. You know, anti-cancer, antiviral, and certainly microbiome support. And you can say microbiome support really for every mushroom. To tell you a little bit about Trametes in terms of the materia medica here, they contain beta-glucans, highest of any mushroom, as I mentioned. And then these two polysaccharides, beta-glucans, they're beta-glucans that have attached to them a peptide molecule. And just as I mentioned, you know, the side branches for beta-glucans, the substitution of different monosaccharides, but also the substitution of different R groups, like with the addition of a peptide group to the beta-glucan molecule, it's even more potent. And it's the mushroom, it's the mycelium that's doing this, you know, metabolically inside itself. That's one reason why mycelium is so potent. So, so so the PSK, that's the Japanese one. PSP, that's the one we're talking about with the immunity study. And then, as I mentioned, 17 different triterpenes, highest beta-glucan. It's any wonder that historically, turkey tail has been used for cancer in many, many different cultures, and still is being used in cancer, and still is a great choice for cancer. Well, I think any mushroom is a good choice for cancer if you can dose it high enough, get high enough levels of those beta-glucans and the other active molecules to make a difference. So it has the ergosterol and beta-cytosterol as well. It's found worldwide. It's considered to be, it's a basidiomycete, a polypore. Traditionally, it was used to increase circulation, clear heat and damp. For rheumatism and fevers, it was decocted, used as a wash for eczema, extracted in worm oil for knotty swellings, infection and inflammation of upper respiratory, urinary, and digestive tracts, used to increase energy and stamina, benefits patients with chronic active hepatitis, and for general immune weakness and tumors. And energetically, it's sweet and slightly bitter. To my taste, though, I taste it to be slightly sour as well, which would be one reason why we see it in the liver channel. Slightly warming, it dispels damp, reduces phlegm, helps to nourish the mind, and goes into liver, spleen, heart, and lung channels. Next mushroom, maitake mushroom, hen of the woods. Grifola frondosa. You'll find them if you live in one of those blessed areas where mushrooms actually grow, growing at the base of a tree. Some of these grow as big as 50 pounds. It's a prized edible mushroom. It's very tasty if you can get it. This was a study done by a Japanese company that had created a special extract of beta-glucans from their maitake and made it into a glycerite liquid formula. It's called maitake D-fraction. They play with the different names. There's maitake MD fraction, maitake PET fraction. A little confusing to me. I try to go to the research and find out what's really in each of these and how different are they or all the same. And I have to say that the language in the literature is, I think, intentionally vague. I think it's their way of patenting it by not letting you know exactly what's in it, because it's hard to really get a patent on these guys that are, But anyway, so this was an in vitro study using 3 types of cancer cell lines, and they wanted to test the direct effect of maitake diffraction on cancer cell integrity at several dosages. They did mammary gland, connective tissue, and canine lymphoma cells. And they found that the diffraction inhibited the growth of the mammary gland tumor and the connective tissue tumor, but was cytotoxic to the canine lymphoma cells. So that gets you all excited about using it in canine lymphoma. And a lot of people speak very highly of the maitake diffraction as being very effective and very much more palatable than some of the mushrooms that are out there. So it's not a bad product. The study itself, I have questions about it. For instance, I wanted to do a parallel study for this, and I took it to the Dean of Research at LMU to talk about it, and realized that this study was talking about the direct effect of beta-glucans on cancer cells. Well, I went through the literature. There's no evidence in the literature that there actually are beta-glucan receptors on cancer cells, unless maybe the cancer cell is lymphoma. Maybe that's why they got good results with the lymphoma. Usually what they're doing when they're doing in vitro is they're doing tissue culture of effector cells, of immunocytes, because you have to have that in between, that go between, between the beta-glucan and the action. You have to have the effector cell that receives it and gets modulated and activated by it. So I don't quite understand why the beta-glucan killed these cancer cells in a petri dish without any immune cells in there. Anyway, so they went ahead and 10 years later, no, 3 years later rather, sorry, they were able to, they tried to do a clinical trial based on the cytotoxicity of the maitake diffraction on the lymphoma cells in tissue culture. And they took 15 dogs that had confirmed intermediate to high-grade lymphosarcoma with an expected survival time of at least 2 weeks and no major organ dysfunction. And then the dose was like 3 drops per kg BID before meals. I figured out that comes out to about 6 mg per kg per day of beta-glucans. My dosing for cancers begins at 10 mg per kg and goes as high as 30 mg per kg. So, right away I'm going, is that adequate? And no objective response was observed. Quality of life assessments were good to excellent for the first 2 weeks, but tumor progression continued for 12 out of 15 dogs. So I'm not a super bright guy, really, when it comes to these academic researcher types. But why in the hell would they choose dogs that are on the verge of death for a study? It's not going to be successful. I would have taken, early stage lymphoma when they came in, and started there, and then maybe work and get some good success to encourage your investors, and then go to the next stage of lymphoma. Anyway, so in all future literature by this company, they leave out this study because they don't want to them it's a failed study. To me, it's an interesting study to see that. Because I don't think that it means you shouldn't use maitake diffraction for cancer. I just think you need to use it early enough, and you need to use a much, much higher dose. And maybe there you would be successful. So talk a little bit about maitake, Grifola frondosa, hunt of the woods. It's got these polysaccharides. Supposedly maitake has much more cross-branching of any other beta-glucan out there, and that is why it is so language. That's why it's so immune modulating. The variety of different beta-glucans have been isolated. Some triterpenes have been isolated from it. It has ergosterol, and in this one study, they, for 6 to 8 hours, exposing mushrooms to sunlight, took the vitamin D2 from 460 international units to nearly 32,000 international units. So it can be a very effective way of getting your vitamin D as well. Grifola means braided fungus. Maitake means dancing mushroom. Prized edible mushroom primarily in northeast United States, but globally distributed in temperate deciduous forests. Grows at the stumps at the base of dead or dying wood, deciduous hardwoods. And you may know, if you do Chinese medicine, Grifola umbellata or Zhuling, which is good for urinary tract issues. We'll talk about that when I talk about poria in the next hour. Traditionally, this is a prized edible mushroom. In fact, for those that gather mushrooms as a living, families would will the locations of their maitake secret areas to their children, so they could continue to keep that secret and continue to make money as a family, wildcrafting and collecting these mushrooms. But traditionally used as a mild diuretic, fevers, antimicrobial, especially gonorrhea, stomach, spleen conditions, hemorrhoids. Spleen helps to, restoring the spleen helps to bring things up in the body. Hemorrhoids are kind of where energy's sinking. Shin and nervous system, good for that. All mushrooms have some benefit for that. And arthritis as well, which, if I say that, that means there was a study showing it has benefit for arthritis and it was analgesic. It's sweet, little bitter, like all mushrooms kind of have a little bit of bitter edge to that. Strengthens the spleen, tonifies the kidneys and adrenals, supports the zheng qi, and which is involved with organ homeostasis, tonifies qi deficiencies, and goes to the liver, stomach, spleen, and kidney channels. Okay, the last mushroom for this hour, lion's mane. Lion's mane's gotten a lot of interest because of its ability to improve memory, and cognition, and reduce stress, and certainly, as a culture, as a country, as a planet, we need this mushroom. But this one was a Japanese study in which they took dried and powdered lion's mane mushroom, and they added it to a kibble, to a dry pet food, and they measured before and after microbiome parameters. And they found, in general, improvement of these microbiome parameters with the use of the lion's mane powder, which contains a lot of fiber, a lot of the chitin, a lot of the beta-glucans, and the fiber feeds the microbiome, and the beta-glucans also help to regulate the immune environment in the bowel, so that it favors the growth of the good bugs as compared to the bad bugs. So I'm not going to drive into great depth as far as the actual specifics here. I know there have been some really good talks here on the microbiome, but they used, it was a feeding trial of 16 weeks. They did PCR of the feces. There were 6 dogs in 3 study groups. They saw no negative effect on microbiota diversity with lion's mane at both dosages. They saw firmicutes was reduced at both dosages. And Blautia was increased at the low dosage associated with weight loss. Firmicutes, bacteroides ratio was associated with healthy gut microbiota. So, so they did see some benefits. You know, probably not as great as we'd like to see with some other things, but definitely was improving the microbiome in general. And I got this is a nice little diagram to show, you know, when we talk about the microbiome, really the beta-glucans fit right in there as far as their signaling of the dendritic cells. They're helping to control the immune environment and the microbial environment here. So they're very much a part of the microbiome. And to talk a little bit about Hericium erinaceus, lion's mane, hotugu. Its common name is lion's mane. There's some pictures of this. It really looks like the back of a monkey's head. Hericium means hedgehog. Found widely, usually found on dead or dying oak, usually fairly high up on the tree. Only recently have we been able to cultivate the fruiting bodies of lion's mane on wood pellets. And that's allowed us to be able to do more research because we've had more available to do that. And that's where we discovered that not only did it traditionally can have a benefit for GI, that it also has a neuroprotective, a neurobeneficial effect in general. And we mentioned the hyricinines and erinacines, the triterpenes and diterpenes in the mycelium and the fruiting body. And they stimulate the production of brain-derived nerve growth factor. They're insulinotropic. Reduced blood glucose levels are associated with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, angiogenic, antioxidant, helps to accelerate wound healing, can treat dermal and corneal ulcers, and also addresses pulmonary inflammation and symptoms of asthma. These triterpenes cross the blood-brain barrier. They're known to increase myelination. We see some studies for its use in multiple sclerosis that have good outcome. Possibly an application for degenerative myelopathy. That's a pretty tough disease to deal with, but maybe if you get it early enough. I know there was been some use of it in some of these older dogs with DM, and we didn't see a lot of results for the DM, but many of these same dogs that had degenerative myelopathy also had cognitive disorders, and that's where we started to see benefits with cognitive disorders. It's anti-neoplastic historically against gastric and esophageal cancers, combined with Adriamycin, successfully treated drug-resistant human hepatocellular carcinoma, traditionally used for gastritis and esophagitis and digestive issues. So we could also see it being used for IBD. Good for neuropathy. Because of the nerve growth factor, we believe that it can produce nerve regeneration, but it's not been proven yet. It does improve memory, has a settling effect, calming but not sedative. That's how the mushrooms are in general. Most popular mushroom sold in the US today. And I have found, and I've been exploring, the interface between cannabis and mushrooms, and there's now companies starting to have products with both in them. I'm going to fall off here in a second. And that does work well with both CBD and CBG. I've been using CBG quite a bit, and both of them have a very good synergistic benefit for reduction of anxiety and for calming. It can help with nerve damage. And experimental models in the rat showed that it increased recovery from trauma. There was a study with multiple sclerosis that improved the myelination, the mature myelinating nerve fibers, and nerve growth factor has a protective effect on axons and myelin by suppressing immune-mediated inflammatory processes. We used to think that degenerative myelopathy and multiple sclerosis were parallel diseases. It turns out that degenerative myelopathy is much more like ALS than MS. So I don't have any information about ALS with lion's mane. I have seen studies with THC and CBD for ALS in humans showing slowing down of that process, just to let you know. There are studies for dementia. We're seeing some benefit with early Alzheimer's in some humans. We don't have any veterinary studies. We don't have any veterinary studies for CCD, anxiety disorders with lion's mane, but those will be coming, I am sure. And as I mentioned, synergistic with cannabinoids. Traditionally used for stomach ache, GI ailments, chronic gastritis, digestion, gastric, duodenal ulcers, neurasthenias. general ability, and the powder itself can be a hemostatic. Energetically, it's sweet and bland. It's a very tasty mushroom. It's great if you cut it thick and make like steaks out of it. I like that. You can even put them on a hamburger bun and cheese on it. So it's kind of cool. It's got neutral energy. Most mushrooms are pretty neutral. Strengthens the spleen, as you would imagine, with digestive, tonifies kidney and adrenal, supports zong qi, and tonifies deficiency. It almost sounds like a repeat of this late slide. You can see many mushrooms have very similar properties. Strengthens the stomach, regulates qi, tonifies the spleen, promotes digestion, calms the shen, and strengthens the brain. Those are what people are looking at these days for lion's mane. So that's number 2. Any questions?